Hello. So we are live again, and apologies for the technical difficulties earlier, but we are glad to be here. I'm Kate Howe. I'm the co-founder of Postcards for Parents.
And John Stewart, I'm the clinical director for Postcards for Parents. I'm glad to be here as well, and look forward to our topic today, Kate.
Yeah, so we're talking about the fear of missing out, mostly in terms of missing out socially on things that your friends or your kids' friends are doing, and how that is kind of can be more prevalent in the summer, with as school friends kind of make different plans, and one kid goes to camp, one kid goes to visit their grandparents, and there's the sense of what I'm doing as good as what other people are doing. But this is obviously something that can happen all year. So these are important things to learn how to deal with as a parent. So if we just jump in, what is, FOMO, the acronym, and what is it as a feeling?
Yeah, I think that this is not something that kids exclusively struggle with. I think we all do on some level. And I think, what is the fear of missing out? I think clearly the most powerful fear relates to a social dynamic. I think that there are other places where fear of missing out can also be maybe a little less a social dynamic, more just that sense that you're at a crossroad in life and you've got to make a choice. Am I going to live on the ocean, or am I going to live in the mountains? Or I don't want to leave out the flatlands because it's where I grew up. But if I'm going to make a choice between something like the setting of the ocean or the setting of the mountains, with the fear that, boy, if I go one path, it means I don't go the other, and there's the fear of missing out that can create real dilemmas in terms of just moving our lives forward. We get to that crossroad. In a minute, we'll talk about that crossroad as it relates to social dynamics, because I think those are far and away the most powerful and the ones that our kids are typically struggling with the most. But I think that there is just an overall demand of us, if we're going to live this life kind of well and gracefully, there's an overall demand of us that we have the ability to choose a path and then not perseverate on what it is that we might have found had we gone on the other path, at the expense of enjoying and being present with the path we're on. So I do think that there is that overall dynamic, and I think that we live in a world that gives us so many options, so many places, from what to watch as a movie to what restaurant to go to. We are pretty privileged in that respect, and we have lots and lots of options, and I think it does leave us standing at that crossroad a little more often. So let's say that's one category that's not as socially powerful, but nonetheless has its own power in a world where there are so many options. But I think the fear of missing out, Kate, as it relates to social dynamics, which means it can be as much as I'm fearful of missing out because I didn't choose the right social option. So it means I'm not on that other path, which was a different social option. Or it can sometimes be the fear of I've not been included, I've been left out. And that is a very tough social dynamic. So your question, why does missing out or social rejection feel so bad? Well, I think it goes back to the fact that, we've said many times that we're about as well as we are well connected. And that the fact is that anytime we feel like we're missing out on a social dynamic, it's difficult. And particularly if it's a social dynamic that is highly valued. I think for kids to, they oftentimes face a situation, can I play with Joey next door, who isn't a real high value social connection, but he's my friend and he's somebody to do something with? Or do I hold off and wait and see if Mary's going to call, who's a high valued, less accessible friend? And that fear of missing out can put us into some really complicated dilemmas, certainly all the way up into dating and who we, at a later point in life, those choices that mean if I do this, well, it means that I'm not doing that. But I think that the overall issue in terms of the social dynamics of fear of missing out is that you're missing out on an opportunity for something that's going to be in some way affirming of your value, of yourself. It's going to be maybe even affirming of your status, which we'd like to think doesn't matter that much. But, we're a tribal species, and within all tribes, there's always a hierarchy, and most of us are striving on some level to not be at the lower end of the pecking order in that regard. So I think fear of missing out is an incredibly normal human dynamic that, as we watch our kids struggle with it, how do we go about helping them manage it? And I think what we're going to ultimately end up coming back to is the way that we help kids deal with this kind of complex dynamics is the same way we help them deal with all complex dynamics.
Okay, let's unpack a little more before we tell everybody the answer. So
I like to find the question better before we move to answers. I love that.
So I think that was great that you started with just the non-social fear of missing out, right? Am I going to play soccer? Or am I going to do swimming? Am I going to watch this TV show or watch that TV show? Because once you so that sets the table for like just learning to be happy with your choices and learning to understand that no matter what choice you make, you're always choosing against something else. So that's just like a baseline thing that people and kids have to learn how to deal with. And the reason I'm glad we started with that is because when you layer the feelings that come along with the social aspect on top, that it becomes so much more heightened and sort of, worry that you can forget that it's, I just have to learn to, remember to, how do I figure out how to be happy with what I chose? And there's always going to be something that I missed out by making a choice, right?
Yep.
And then, also I'm curious about what difference does it make when you've made the choice and you've chosen one thing and you're still missing out on the thing that you didn't choose, versus when somebody else makes the choice. Like if you weren't invited to, a friend's sleepover or a party, how does that choice versus having it thrust on you make a difference?
No, I think there's a big difference in that. I think that when a child or an adult, but let's talk about kids, when a youngster feels like they had no agency in this, they were simply not thought of, or they were thought of in a way that made people not want to include them. That's a very painful reality. It tends to bring up feelings of shame about, somehow I'm not what I should be. Oftentimes say I'm either too much or I'm not enough. And the people don't, they frankly don't want to have me with them. That is a tremendously painful moment that none of us are going to make our way through without some struggle. It's a moment, it's a threat to self-esteem. And I think if you get through life without a number of those experiences, and it can even, it can play out in so many different ways. On a child's birthday party, being included when there are some activity that comes up to go sledding, or just normal things, all the way up to, on some level, it's the same dynamic when you don't get chosen for a job that you've applied for, that you really wanted. So I think there's a continuum across our lives. So and it's not, that fear that I am somehow not the chosen, that I am not what I need to be the one who's brought in. That elicits very primitive, very deep insecurities. So that's not a small thing. It's about as loaded as it comes in terms of managing our social dynamic.
Okay, so let's dive into that. There is the other kind of lighter aspect of this, but if we were to dive into what you're just talking about, how do you counsel people to move through those moments? Yeah,
carefully. I think the counsel is more about, it's not so much about counseling. If our job is to help someone move through, It's more about our presence, our ability to, and this is, I know I'm like a broken record on this, but the more I know about it, the more I know that this is the truth. The truth from my perspective is that you show up, with a child, let's say they've not been invited to the birthday party. The first thing you do is you don't try to talk them out of their feelings, because that just leaves them alone with them. It actually makes them feel more ashamed on some level. They not only weren't included, now they're being a wimp, or they're being, they're not thinking about it the way they should think about it. So the first thing we do is just show up and be with them. And the best way to be with a child, or really anybody, but a child with their emotions, is by kind of matching our level of emotional, not the same content. They may be really sad, so we show up and we're not really sad, but at the same level, or vitality, it's sometimes referred to in the literature. We show up and we acknowledge this is an important moment. You didn't get invited to the party, sweetie. Oh, that's hard, huh? And that they're really struggling with that. If a child is saying, no, I don't care, I didn't get invited, I don't care, well, then we deal with that a little differently, because we don't want to undermine their defenses that they're using to get through it. But if you've got a child who's openly sad about it, well, then we just show up and we feel the sadness with them. And once they have a sense that we felt the sadness with them and they're at least not alone, well, we then have the ability to move into being curious. How do they understand it? What do you think's going on? I sure think you're a fun kid to be with, and I don't get how you didn't get invited, but what do you think? So you're then kind of moving. You've shown up, you've felt it with them. Then you can help them begin to think about it in some ways, so they can create a story, a way of understanding it that hopefully is not devastating, that provides them some way to come through it without feeling like they're just a pariah. That's being left out. Oh, it is hard. And so it's an emotional moment where we need to show up and be emotionally present with our kids for it. And then we figure out what the next steps are. Once they have a sense that we're with them, then they oftentimes have their own resources that they may bring up and say, well, I didn't want to go anyway. So, all right, don't challenge a child's defenses when they're trying to figure out how to. It's like somebody's drowning going down the river and they're making their way towards the shore, and you say, well, wait a minute, your stroke, you should be doing a different stroke. And it's not helpful. So
okay.
we show up and we kind of help them get through the other side of it without pretending that it doesn't stink, because it does.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But so that's interesting. So if you don't challenge a child's defenses, if they're kind of saying, oh, I didn't care anyway, but you're kind of 99.9% sure that they really did care, you just go with what they said?
Yeah, you say, well, that's good, because you know what? That could feel crummy if you did care, and I'm glad that you figured out a way to not have it feel too bad. You're not trying to say, well, of course you don't care. Those guys are all jerks. You're not. You may stay there long enough to say, well, I know sometimes things like that have hurt when it happened in my life, but sounds like you got a way to kind of go through it and say, all right, not have it feel too bad. You never want to shame kids for what they're doing to get through the moment. It's and when you see them do something, you kind of give them credit for it. I was with my grandkids this weekend, and we went to an amusement park, and my grandson his little sister, who is braver than he is about some things, was going on some rides he wasn't going on. And it was really hard for him. So he got on one, and he didn't want to go, and he got on, and he was kind of mad at me because he blamed me for once he was on it. He said, well, it's your fault I'm on this damn thing. Essentially, he's 6. And so we're going up this log flume, and he's just really ambivalent about being there, but he knows it's way too late to get out of it. And he begins to talk to himself. All right, no, I know it's going to be over in just like It's like 5 seconds. It's going to be over, and I'm going to be okay. I know it's going to be over. And so watching him go through this really frightened state, and then being able to say, oh my goodness, afterwards being able to say, I can't believe how you talked yourself through that, buddy. What a good strategy. It was scary, wasn't it? While he watches his little sister look delighted the whole time. So I think that anytime we see our kids utilize some defense, we don't want to shame them for it. We may be able to say, well, it's kind of, we're aware that may hold them, it may not. We may go in later that night before bedtime or at bedtime, and they're crying into their pillow, and you go, oh, what's going on? Well, I did really care. He said, well, I thought you maybe did, but I thought that way you dealt with it was okay. Let's just feel it together right now for a little while.
Yeah, so kind of be open for those feelings to maybe show up at a different time and place. Absolutely. Yeah, which is probably dealing with it really well. Yeah. You brought something up which I'm curious about is, most everybody kind of experiences rejection and the pain of that at some point in their life, and I think as parents, things can be really re-triggered by our own experiences can be really re-triggered by seeing our kids do that. So, parents, I think, can go to great lengths to try to avoid having their kids feel those things, either avoid experiencing the rejection, facilitate their social lives, or avoid feeling them. So, talk about that and how a parent might think about these issues.
I think you hit on a couple of things there, Kate. I mean, one of the trickiest places in parenting is when something our kids dealing with activates something that's not finished in us, and we all have some of that. Our kids will help us figure out what's not finished in us, and we then have these kind of less than graceful responses to our kids, or we get really exercised in some way that's maybe not directed at our kid. We may get really upset with other parents because they did what they did, or we kind of go down a rabbit hole. So I think the first thing is to recognize that when something touches us in a relatively deep way, we find ourselves having a strong emotional reaction. We want to stop and think about that for a moment. We want to ask ourselves, I wonder where that comes from in my own life. How much of this is about me, and how much of it is about my kid? That's always a question that helps us be the parent that we want to be, because some stuff is going to come up that's about us, and we want to just take a deep breath when that happens and go, wait a minute, I don't want to go too far down the path on this because some of this emotion is mine. Now, what can parents do to, inoculate kids from some of the painful realities of that? I mean, I think sometimes you can prepare them. You might be able to say, hey, I heard Billy's mom, I heard Billy's having a swimming party. I also heard he only got to invite 6 kids, and I know some kids probably aren't going to be invited. I don't know if it's you or not, buddy, but so I think anytime you can kind of give a little bit of I would say, I can't imagine you wouldn't be invited, but I know he's got 2 cousins or whatever. You can do a little bit of laying some groundwork, but you also have to be very careful when you do that you're not expressing in some way something that the child is going to experience as you're affirming that you would suspect he would not be the one invited. It's really, this is such delicate stuff. Our kids look for affirmation of the weak link in their chain, and it does not take much from us as adults to go, yeah, there it is, and they go, yeah, where that may not have been what we were intending to do at all. But I think so you can do a little bit of anticipatory guidance with them when you have that opportunity. When it comes along and you don't have any opportunity to do it, well, then you feel it with them, as we were talking about earlier. And it's never bad to, if you can do it with credibility, to say, oh, I remember when that happened to me once, or Dad told me a story about when that happened to him once, or just that stuff that they're not alone. Because when there is a sense that others are with them, that others know that experience, it mitigates the shame to some extent, the shame of having been, being such a loser. That's if you have a kid that's having a social dynamic that's complicated, it's okay to talk about one of your own friends, or even if you can do it with credibility, You can make up a little story about your own life. But the problem is, that if you're making up stories, you got to remember them, because they will come back and ask you about, what about that kid you had in 5th grade? And you go, well, yeah, oh yeah, that one. So it's not to say that you can never, Mark Twain had said, you never forego a good story for lack of facts. I think that as a parent, you sometimes may need to do that, but just make a note of it, because they may well come back to it. So I think aside from walking beside them, feeling it with them, and maybe after some time, but not too quickly, distracting them and allowing them to say, hey, let's go ride bikes, on the trail, or let's go, there's nothing wrong with that, but don't go to it too quickly, because on some level, this is the stuff of social learning. This is where we learn to have those feelings and figure out how to get through them without just always moving on to something to make us feel better, that which we can often do as parents, because we don't like to see our kids feel sad. So it's okay to move on to the next thing, but don't move to it too quickly. Don't fail to be present with your child with whatever it is that they're struggling with.
And also probably, your sort of calmness as a parent and not being like too worried or surprised also normalizes that this happens to everybody. It's not shameful,
That absolutely great. That when we seem upset, and that's when oftentimes it's something it's triggered something with us. When we get really, really revved up and we act like it's a big deal, that does not help the child move through it. It actually there's nothing worse than a worried or upset or angry parent about a dynamic that's been visited on a child. If the coach's son always gets to pitch, because that's how it seems to work from my experience, that you as a parent, you don't want to get too revved up in that. You can talk to your partner about it, but just this is how it is sometimes, And if your kid says, why the coach's kid always gets to pitch? Well, I think he thinks his son's the best pitcher. Most parents think their kids are the best pitchers. So that's how it is. So just even being playful once you're at a point where you can do that. You don't want to be playful too soon, or it's an empathic miss. But afterwards, if you didn't get invited to the skating party, maybe after you've worked through it all, you can say, and maybe it'll get really warm out and the ice will melt. It's okay to be playfully vindictive.
Yeah, and get a little laughter out.
Yeah.
What about checking the facts? I mean, you mentioned it in terms of the anticipatory guidance, saying, I heard that Ben is having a birthday party and he can only invite 6 kids, whether that's true or not. I mean, if your child doesn't get invited and is like, they hate me, I'm the worst, kind of, I'm totally left out, going into that really bad place. If you have that fact of, that he could only invite 2 kids or 3 kids.
I wouldn't move to the facts too quickly, because facts are left-brained. Facts are all about that left hemisphere. And if your child is lost in the right, if you hand them a left hemispheric tool like facts, it's just going to make them feel alone. It's not to say the facts aren't valuable or useful, but not too quickly. Be with them, help them get regulated. And then once they come back up, well, then you can offer some facts, because they may be able to take them in and actually use them. But you start putting those out there with a child who's, whether it's with a child or with your partner, if they're down here rattling with some right hemispheric bit of, sadness, frustration, and the right hemisphere is very wise. The stuff it's feeling is not crazy. It may not be rational, but it's very real and very important. So they're down here and you start giving them lots of rational information. All it does is make them feel alone. It's an empathic miss. So when somebody's operating on the right hemisphere with lots of emotion, then meet them there. And once you've met them there, they may be able to move back up and where they're going to, all right, now we can create a narrative. We can add facts to the story.
So you might add facts before they've gone there if you had them. That was what you're saying.
If you had them beforehand, you
Yeah.
might be able, because now you don't have a child who's already emotionally engaged. If the child is emotionally upset about it, well, then you don't give facts. But if you kind of anticipate it and they're not already upset about it, you give them some facts, well, that may help them. Actually, it may inoculate them a little bit.
I like asking about the details of this because I think a lot of parents will go to kind of the rational arguments because we're not as emotionally engaged. We might have more facts. And so this is, how we're thinking about it. But I think part of the fear is also like, if you go there with the emotions, you do kind of validate that those are the facts. You know what I mean? Like that the fact is that that they were excluded, that they're not wanted by their friends. You know what I mean? By kind of not disputing those facts.
Well, I mean, I think that we don't carry enough weight typically to be able to dispute some aspect of self-doubt. Hopefully not self-loathing, but we're if only our words were powerful enough to do that, but they're not. What is powerful enough to be helpful is our presence, is our loving connection and presence. And then once we get to a better place, once they're in an okay place, well, then you may be able to playfully, do something with it. But those facts, unfortunately, once again, if a child is lost down there in their right limbic system, they're just distraught. The facts mean nothing to them. And when we offer them, it discredits us and makes them feel alone. So, but if you're in a better place, well, then you may be able to do a little bit of, I don't like that kid anyway.
but what you're saying is that
maybe the devil's child. I'm not sure.
But what you're saying is that by going there and kind of being with them emotionally, you are in fact invalidating the feeling that they're not worthy of company, even if it's their mom or their dad and not the friend that they wanted.
I think that the only way, I think Hughes talks about it, it's the middle place. It's not, you don't feel what they're feeling. You don't just crumble, but you also don't go to a place of kind of rational, this is just, you find that middle place in there, that's where you're feeling it with them. And then with time, you may be able to use that and create a narrative that's helpful for them.
Okay, cool. So that's a really helpful. I guess the last thing I wanted to talk about was to go back to the original kind of part of FOMO that we were talking about in terms of having made a choice, to do this sport, not that one, to watch this show, not that one.
To buy that, I think about with kids, to buy that. I've got $10 at the store. I bought this toy, it's buyer's remorse. Is that
exactly? So even without these kind of stronger social dynamics that we've just been discussing, this is still a difficult thing to be happy with the path that we've chosen. So what are some ways that parents can help kids develop that capability?
Yeah, I mean, I think once again, you got to feel it with them a little bit as they're going, I got this bear. I wish I had got the stuffed dog. It was so cute. And so you stay with them for a minute. You go, yeah, it is hard, isn't it, buddy? And once they feel like they're kind of, they feel, well, you might say, but boy, that dog you got, he is so cute. Once you've been there with them, you can then move into that. And some of these things are little things. They're not going to be big things. Others are going to be, bigger choices that they've made. So I don't, I think that, once again, back to some of that, you can talk about times where you've taken a path that you've later regretted, and then sometimes maybe even discover that's the best path. I think the more you can, once you get them to a place where they're emotionally okay, the more you can now just have a conversation about that dynamic. Yeah, those are tough. As soon as you went into that store with that $10, buddy, you were in a tough spot. because it meant you could only spend it on one thing. It meant you were leaving a whole store of other stuff back. That's hard, isn't it? Just helping them kind of name it as a normative dilemma that they are going to encounter many times. So that the one thing that we don't want to do is have you not love your stuffed dog because he's so cool. You'll use whatever finesse you have once they've experienced you as present to then kind of help reframe what they're doing. But you don't go there until you are with them about the fact that it's hard. It's hard to make a choice that is exclusive of another choice. I think my wife, in terms of marriage, has been dealing with this for many, many years.
We should have her on to ask what her strategies are. Are there, I mean, so it seems like there are some people who are sort of always thinking the grass is greener on the other side, and some people who are maybe always kind of making their own grass green. Is that true? And if so, what kind of influences being one way or another?
Yeah, I think it's a great observation. And I don't know that it's a trait. I don't think it's genetic, but I do think that it probably has something to do with the nature and the way in which gratitude has been framed in the context of their lives. I do think that we as parents, gratitude, just like exercise, is we want our kids to go outside and play. We want our kids to eat well. Well, there's certain patterns or practices that we want our kids to have. And I think gratitude is one of them. And I haven't thought about this a lot. I'm kind of responding to your question, but I think that kids who have grown up with people around them who have a wonderful capacity for the experience, for the seeking of moments of gratitude. And gratitude, we've talked about this a lot because I think it's so important. Gratitude is not something we just stop at. I should be grateful because I'm so damn privileged. That's not gratitude. Gratitude is taking a moment and experiencing something, stopping for a moment and looking at the sunny sky, stopping for the moment and looking at the newly fallen snow, whatever it is, just say, look at that, buddy, look at that. Or parents who help them, when they take the first bite of their ice cream and they just stop and they go, oh, that's so good. So I think that some of it is that when kids are enculturated in the family towards gratitude, I think that facilitates their ability to look to be thankful for what they have, as opposed to a focus on what they didn't get. That's the first thing that comes to mind as you ask that question, Kate. I can't say that I've thought about that a lot, but that's kind of my thought about it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. Certainly modeling gratitude. And I'm sure that as parents, our own messages around like how happy we are with the family, with our own lives, versus looking to other people kind of sink in as well.
I think jealousy, I think if we see in our family, the culture of our family, a lot of envy, a lot of jealousy, those kinds of things.
Comparison.
Yeah. They're all one and the same kind of. So I think those are variables.
Okay. One last difficult question for you, but you brought it up before.
Oh, good.
So, you were talking about a kid balancing a choice between playing with one friend who maybe isn't as exciting versus like wanting an invitation from somebody who has more social capital. And this is intimately linked with fear of missing out and social slights. It's like they hurt more when they're from the people that have more social capital or that wants to kind of be accepted by. How does this even, develop? Like, who has more social capital versus others? Is it just like individual perception? And
boy,
what do we do as parents?
I think evolution has a lot to do with that. I think
Okay.
that, I think that evolution, it's funny. I mean, I think that's a great question. And I think, social psychologists have been looking at that in depth for many, many years. And I think when you look at it kind of on a microcosm, like a playground, who are the kids who have the greatest status? I mean, the first thing is probably going to be their parents' status. That's one thing. There is some transferability. Kids who think that they're kind of special because their parents are kind of special, and there is some of that. I think competency. I think intellect. I think attractiveness with some degree of tie to social norms. Social variants that say, well, this is what's attractive. This is what isn't attractive. There's a lot there. And I think that kids who are a little more insecure, kids whose families have not affirmed that they are who've not been as good at just affirming the joy that they have in this child's existence and their being, the ones who have formed a greater kind of sense of the value of the child is in their accomplishments, those sort of things. I mean, I think that can go both ways, because I think some highly competent kids who feel like they need to always be at the top of the pyramid are going to be aggressive at arriving at the top of the pyramid. But other kids who have just a core, deep sense that they're lovable, good souls, they're not likely to end up at the top of the pyramid, at least not for a while. They may well end up there later, because those who fight so hard to get at the top of the pyramid do have some propensity to burn out and to have that not work well. But so that's a great question, which I don't have a great answer for, other than that I think the thing that we want to do is exhibit empathy. Mary Gordon's notion that empathy is caught, it's not taught. And so when we see a child who's low status, who's striving to be with our kid, who doesn't necessarily want to be with them, I mean, we just want to exercise. We don't want to shame our kid for not wanting to be with the low status kid, but we want to show a lot of compassion towards that other youngster. Do our best with that, because we want, once again, empathy is caught. It's, as our kids see us be empathic, but shaming our kids into empathy is not, it doesn't work.
So that example would sort of sound like modeling empathy for the child, and kind of maybe also talking about what you see in terms of valuing them and what they could bring to a play date or something like that.
And I think it's also, you need to empathize with your child's, you name it to some extent. I know Susie's kind of more popular, and so you probably, there's a part of that we all want to be with a popular kid. I get that it's hard, but boy, Mary, she's been a really good friend. She's there. And I really like Mary. And so you got to figure it out. But I know it's hard. There's some of that stuff is just painful. It's painful to watch as a parent. It's painful to be that kid who's having to figure out how to live within their evolving values.
Well, and the thing I also heard you say is, a lot of it is not in the parents' control in terms of even their own status, or, what their child looks like, or how extroverted, or what the social dynamics of the school are. But one thing that is in their control is really delighting in their own child, and kind of having that bond, and that kind of provides a buoyancy, right, where these things aren't as hurtful, I think, to the child.
Buoyancy. I like that. I like that idea that our love for the spirit and the heart of those kids that we take care of, and for them to see that reflected back, that does give them social buoyancy. It does not stop them from sometimes being pushed under, but they come back up. That's the good thing.
Okay, super. Well, those were a lot of great answers on some tricky questions. So thank you. Any last words on this topic?
No, I mean, I think it's a tough one. it's as complicated as it gets. As I say, the field of social psychology has been tangling with all of these, and it's a fascinating field. If I wouldn't have gone the clinical direction, I would have been a social psychologist, because I just found that stuff just so interesting.
Yeah.
But it's complex.
Well, it's complex, but it also, I think, is responsible for so much of our experience as people, and so much of how we feel. So helping our kids develop ability to navigate it is kind of a huge gift if we can do it.
And once again, if we can just walk beside them and maintain some hope, express some gratitude and empathy, I think that's the elixir that gets most of our kids through most of these things.
All right. Well, thanks for the formula.
It's always good to see you, Kate. We'll see you next week and discuss some other, hopefully less complicated topic.
I'll find an easy one for you. Okay. All right, thanks, John.
Bye-bye.
Bye.